Hello again. Welcome back. I'm Sherry Marks. I'm pastor of the Church of the Open Door in Ukiah, California, and this is my message for this week. We're glad to have you with us. Thanks for coming. The quote that is the anchor for today's message does not come from some theological tome or from anybody's current blog. It's actually just a bit of snark created and posted by my pastor friend, Jeannie Lovelace. Thank you, Jeannie. And it's printed on a coffee mug, and it reads thusly: I can do all things through a verse taken out of context. Now, that may be more of a pastor sort of joke, but I imagine you get the idea. I'm going to get back to that coffee mug in a few minutes here, but first I want to lay out my position on who wrote the Bible. It's going to be short, honest. If you're a confirmed biblical literalist, that means you accept every word, every jot and tittle as coming directly from the mouth of God. The classic illustration that used to come with this statement shows a man with a pen and paper, or most likely meant to be parchment, with God, presumably, whispering directly into his ear. It means that you have to give equal weight to every word in the Bible. No picking and choosing the verses that confirm your biases while ignoring the ones that do not bolster your opinions. It means the God who dictated all of this put in some bizarrely pointless things as well as some accidentally hysterically funny stuff, mixed in with the parts that really matter. Such a belief also includes accepting that the God you worship enjoined the people newly returned from exile in Babylon to rejoice as Babylonian infants were beaten to death in retaliation. O daughter Babylon, you devastator, happy shall they be who pay you back what you have done to us. Happy shall they be who take your little ones and dash them against the rock. That lovely gem comes from Psalm 137, by the way. No. If I thought for a moment that God actually enjoyed the thought of babies having their brains beaten out against the rocks, I would not follow, believe in, and certainly not love any such being. If that's not your style either, then let's spend some time talking about reading Scripture in context. To read Scripture in context is to accept the reality that the Bible is not a single book, but a library, a compendium of books, written in different centuries by people with differing beliefs and cultural mores. It's the story of a people's growing and evolving understanding of who God is and of their relationship with that God. What we call the Bible today was written over the course of roughly 1,500 years, written down by more than 40 different writers, writing in multiple languages. Its time span covers wars and the rise and fall of kingdoms. It also covers the slow metamorphosis of the Hebrew religion from a polytheism similar to its neighbors to a strict monotheism and a belief system centered in one God and one God only. Some parts of the Hebrew scriptures, what we call today the Old Testament, were written by priests of the temple, whose version of history always gives the temple leadership precedence. Other parts were written by those associated with the royal line, and their writings feature the leadership of the royal government as predominant. Many parts of the Old Testament are written as a history of the people, Some parts are prophecy, some poetry. Other parts are pure mythology stolen from neighboring nations. Large parts of the Bible are extremely xenophobic and horribly misogynistic. Many parts are sickeningly violent, as I just demonstrated earlier here. And this book is notorious for contradicting itself all over the place. Whatever it says in one spot, there's bound to be another spot where it says the exact opposite. Okay, does any of this mean that the Bible has no value? Absolutely not. It means it is a human document written and compiled by humans who are notoriously fallible. But it's also written by a people trying their best to tell their truth as they knew it at that time. And that is important for us to know. All of this leads me to my main point, which is that we have to put some work into reading Scripture. We have to learn to read the Bible in context. Who did the writing? Who were they writing it for? What was their time frame and their political status at the time? What were their primary cultural beliefs? Were they the top dog or the underdog in their present cultural setting? Whatever the answers to these questions, we cannot just pull random single sentences out of Scripture, ignoring their context, and build whole theologies on them. Horrible, sinful things have come from people reading Scripture without context. Passages from Scripture taken out of their rightful context were used by the church in our country to justify enslaving and mistreating African people, claiming the Bible said it was the right thing to do, and that we were the ones to do it. More recently in time, the Germans used Scripture to justify their murder of 6 million Jewish people by quoting Scripture passages that did not mean what they thought they meant. Likewise, writings attributed to Paul and Timothy, among others, applied with no cultural context, have caused untold misery to generation after generation of women and girls by those who wish to strictly hold to first century mores, as they generally misinterpret them. Mistranslated words have also caused terrible results when readers didn't have the awareness to recognize that the translation was faulty. 20th century terminologies dropped into concepts lifted from the first century with no attempt to rectify cultural references have justified terrible actions against LGBTQ people, all in the name of God. Much of Scripture is simply unhelpful, such as this gem from St. Paul. I wish those who unsettle you would castrate themselves. Really? This is wisdom for the ages? While we can understand Paul's frustration with those who followed behind him seeking to undo all that he had taught, I can't find anything actually helpful in this verse. Certainly not without its context explained. As a pastor, probably the verse I've heard misquoted more than any other is Deuteronomy 32:35, which is always presented to me as, "Vengeance is mine. It says so in the Bible," as if a scripture is giving the speaker permission to enact violence. When you read all of Deuteronomy 32, as you should if you're going to toss this verse around, you find that, excuse me, I'm not having a good day with my paperwork today. I do apologize most sincerely. You find that the speaker referred to here is God, and the context is a threat of punishment against the Hebrew people for turning away from God. This line means vengeance belongs to God and not ever to any one of us. And yet, people insist on quoting it as if it is giving them permission for the anger they want to express. So, let's get back to my original coffee mug quote. I can do all things through a verse taken out of context. Now, obviously, this is a little bit of sarcasm, and it's a play on one line from St. Paul's letter to the Philippians in chapter 4, where he says, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And it is a classic example of Scripture being taken out of context. Quoted in its entirety, this is a perfectly legitimate statement explaining that when Christ strengthens us for a particular task, we can do that task. But all too often it is quoted in a shortened version and used to simplify because we know Christ, that's know Christ, in quotes, we are therefore equipped to do anything at all. And I don't believe that's what it means. I know Christ, yet I am not a pastor who could go out and start a new church from scratch. I can't leap tall buildings in a single bound. I believe that if I should ever be called to do such a thing, then I would be equipped to do it. But I don't believe I am especially enabled to do anything that pops into my head just because God is on my side. And yet, this particular scripture is misquoted all the time to justify questionable results. Does all this mean we can't read scripture without a theological education? No. Few of us have that to lean on. What we all do have, however, is common sense, hopefully. If we are well grounded in the teachings and examples of Jesus, then we are going to know when something is authentically from God and when it is not. If you can't imagine it, simply cannot imagine it coming out of Jesus' mouth, then it probably is not Jesus speaking, and it's probably not to be taken as a general teaching on living a life in God. It is more likely a historical record pertaining to a particular event in history when the people did not know any better. We know better. Christ's own Spirit lives in us. He told us so. It's part of us. It helps us understand and reason our way through questions that arise. Don't be afraid to question Scripture. Don't be afraid to doubt it. God isn't going to get mad because we ask questions. Find someone you trust and ask your questions. Line up your pros and cons if you must, and trust the Spirit within you. As disciples of Christ, we are expected to question and work out our own understanding of what Scripture seeks to tell us. Listen then, and trust the Spirit's leading. Trust God to help us understand and to hear what we are meant to hear and know. Amen. Sorry it was sometimes such a garbled mess here, but I hope you understand what it was I was trying to say. Thank you for joining us. May the week ahead of you be blessed.